Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We have a minute more before we actually get started, or a few seconds before we actually get started. So I just wanted to say a preliminary thank you to all of you who have come to share this moment, and we can certainly learn a lot from each other here in this session this evening. My name is Kevin Lane, and this webinar is being hosted by Eudaimonia Barbados, which is my company, and we'll speak a little bit more about that as the evening proceeds. Okay, so again, welcome, and I'm really thankful that all of you came to support and to learn a little bit more about what ethics is all about. So let me just do a quick share screen. Right, I just want to verify, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, great, fantastic. That is good news. Right, so let's get started with this evening's proceedings. Our seminar this evening is entitled What is Ethics? And it is being hosted, as I said before, by my company, Eudaimonia Barbados. And yeah, and I am Kevin Lane. So what is our itinerary this evening for the webinar? Well, you can see it on the screen. We'll have, give a bit of an introduction about myself. Then we'll go right into the meat and the potatoes of today's session. We'll have a bit of a Q&A session, and then a wrap up at the end. At the end of the session, if anybody wants to speak, anybody wants to talk to me, have a little bit of a discussion subsequent to the webinar's closing, I'll stick around for a little bit until that comes about. All right. So let's talk a little bit. Let me give you a bit of an introduction about myself and about the company Eudaimonia Barbados. All right. So as I said, my name is Kevin Lane, and I hold a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill campus, as well as a master's degree in applied and professional ethics from the University of Leeds in England. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies in philosophy. I work, besides my company, I do some work with the university as a part-time tutor and lecturer in philosophy, and a part-time tutor at the Barbados Community College in ethics and citizenship. Besides my passion of philosophy and ethics, I spent 30 years as an IT professional working in across a spectrum of many different businesses and entities in Barbados, from education, from training, to retail, to accounting, you name it. Pretty much I have worked in the IT business for 30 years. And that has given me a unique perspective in terms of leadership, in terms of understanding how businesses, how entities such as government and so on work. And I believe that this perspective plus my training certainly gives me a perspective where I think I can add to the landscape of the country when it comes to ethics and corporate training and so on. All right. And I'm also I'm the founder of Eudaimonia Barbados, a corporate training and consultancy firm specializing in helping organizations, entities, government, NGOs, businesses, even wider society incorporate an ethical outlook in their businesses, in the foundations of their organizations, so that when they move forward, they're moving forward with an underpinning of ethics in their organizations. All right. So what are my objectives here this evening? The objectives here this evening are to help you guys, the participants here, look at the importance of ethics to individuals, organizations, and society. That is very important. Too many, we all make ethical decisions pretty much every day in our lives. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're absolutely life-changing. But so with that in mind, I want to help everyone to understand the importance of having such an ethical outlook in terms of themselves, the organizations they work for, and also the wider society that we all live in. Right? I want to also show via historical examples, and I have a couple examples that I will be sharing with you this evening, how an ethical position, whether good or bad, can be beneficial or detrimental, even financially, to individuals, organizations, or society itself. And at the end, coming close to the end of our webinar this evening, I want to do two brief exercises that I want you guys to participate in. You know, raise your hand if you want to, you want to say something. Unmute your mic if you want to ask a question, what have you, because I want this to be an interactive session. I want this to be a session where you feel free to ask questions, to interact with each other, so that we can learn from each other. It is not me just talking to you, but I want all of us to interact, because that is important when especially when we're talking about things like ethics and morality and so on. All right. And because I want you to now critically assess your own potential ethical outlook. It makes no sense talking about ethics if it is not internalized to see where we can go. All right. Now, this is an introductory sort of a session. We won't get into a lot of details, but we'll talk about that down at the end of near the end of our session. So, what is ethics and why is it important? When you think of the word ethics, when you hear the word ethics, what comes to mind? I want you to think about that a little bit. What comes to mind? Is it morals? Is it good versus bad? Is it customs? You know, we all have our various customs in our homes for ourselves, in our businesses, in wider society. We have our customs. We also have, is it behaviors, how we act? Is it only how we act, or is it how we act a manifestation of our ethics? Does anybody have any ideas or thoughts that they want to share at this time? You can utilize the chat if you want. You can type something in the chat. Or if you feel comfortable, turn on your mic and just share with all of us what your thoughts are. Anybody can feel free to do so. So I see one person comes in. Julia says right and wrong, morals. Yeah. Anyone else care to share? Okay, we have no one willing to jump in and share at this time. So when we talk about morals and ethics and so on, what are we really talking about? Right, Susan, Angela Gaskin jumps in. Oh, we have some people really jumping in now. Fantastic stuff. Angela says, Patricia says a sense of fairness. Angela says morals. Suzanne, behaviors. Warren, ideals of standards of conduct. Seneca says worldview and principles that guide everyone. Hadley, comes in, says values, good versus bad, correct behavior, and so on. So all of you have this perspective of what ethics is all about. When you hear ethics, when we hear our politicians say, I am building my platform on a foundation of morals and ethics. What are they talking about? When we hear people talking about that is outside of my ethical perspective, I don't want to go down that road. What are we really talking about? Well, as you can see on the screen, ethics is the critical study of human behavior and conduct in an attempt to determine good actions from bad actions. What makes a particular set of actions right, and what makes another set of actions wrong? What is it? You see, are acts like torture, murder, tax evasion, price gouging, and you know, we in Barbados now, and all of us around the world, actually, we are faced with really high prices because of the things that are going on around the world that may not be affecting us personally, but it is certainly affecting us from a tangent because of what's going on around the world. So things like gaslighting, we know what gaslighting is. Some person is doing something wrong, but they're doing something wrong, but rather than taking responsibility, they're blaming others for their mistakes or for their actions. I'm doing this because you, and so on. And you guys will be familiar with gaslighting and stealing. Stealing is wrong. Most people argue that stealing is wrong. But the question is it wrong? Because when we think about it, we would say something like stealing is wrong. But if we're stealing to feed our families because there is a problem, maybe we aren't working, we may take a different view to some person who steals because, look, I'm hungry, my family is hungry, I lost my job, and the welfare has not come through. So I went into the supermarket and I took up something. We tend to look at that person in a much more favorable light than we do some person who does it to go. Let's say some person walks over and steals what we would call in Barbados the big mouth drinks to go and sell them on to some person else. We look at that in an entirely different light to some person who is stealing for, to feed their family. Okay, we talk about murder, but if some person is defending themselves, we don't see it necessarily in the same light. So these are things that are important for us to consider when we talk about morality. It isn't necessarily something that is hard and fast. Of course, there are instances where we can say that it's hard and fast, but most of the time we tend to look at it from a perspective where we feel sympathetic to the persons if we think that there may be a quote unquote good reason why they did so. But then finally, there's a question I want you guys to think about, all of you to think about. What is the basis of your moral perspectives? And this is important. And yes, as Lex says, empathy. Karen says, when there is a real/honest need. Yes, when we perceive that, then we think about it in a different way, out of a necessity. Correct, Tanya. That's where we tend to look at it. But what about our moral perspectives? Where do we get our moral underpinnings from? Where do we get the perspective from? Is it from, yes, Tanika, is it religious? Do we see it from God's? Yes, do we see it from God's law? Do we see it from a perspective of God's law? Do we see it as coming from social norms? Do we see it coming from just our conscience? Are we guided just by our conscience? Are we guided by our religious perspective? Are we guided by social laws? You see, I see quite a few people saying they see it from a perspective of God's law, but every person doesn't have that, doesn't come from that same background. But we still, so even if a person doesn't come from that background, what tends to happen is that people may see it from a social perspective. Correct. Socialization. Suzanne says social perspective and a religious perspective. If you are a religious person, for example, you may say, you know, as you've seen here, you see in the chat, a lot of persons saying God's law. If you aren't necessarily a religious individual, you may see it from a social perspective. There are things that we accept in Barbados as normal. For example, a man and a woman may decide to get together and live and cohabitate. Okay, we may see it that way, and we think that is a social norm, and we accept that. While others now from other countries in other areas may not see it that way at all. Let's say you lived in an ultra conservative country, let's say like in Pakistan or Iran, that perspective may be different. A man and a woman would not dare shaka, or as we say, cohabitate in one of those countries. Why? Because they know it would be a certain death sentence. Right, and some people base their morals, as Seneca says in the chat, on their political grounding. I see myself as a conservative. I see myself as a progressive, and so on. So from there, they base their ethical perspectives. All right. So think about it. Where do you get your moral perspectives from as an individual? A company, where does the company or a firm get a company, a government, even a government, where do they get their ethical perspectives from? We may claim Barbados talks about being a Christian society. I would dispute that somewhat, but we claim to be a Christian society. So we get a lot of our moral perspectives from these things, the persons around us, our families. What does our family believe? And we tend to go that route. All right. So let's move on. So let's jump in. Yes, the Constitution as well, and we can talk about that as well, Karen. So let's look at a few examples right now about where persons in the past would have gone some form of ethical dilemmas, and let's look at how they solved it. All right. So let's consider the following. Let's talk about Robert Lund. Robert Lund was the vice president of engineering at a company called Morton Thiokol, which built the rockets for, there's a truck passing. Let's give it a sec to pass by. Yeah. From Morton Thiokol, which built the rockets for NASA's space shuttle program. Now, on this particular day, NASA wanted to launch. There was this big launch. Everybody was anticipating this huge launch because it was supposed to be a very historic launch. All right. No, they wanted to launch, but NASA never launches without the engineering team's approval. The engineering team has to give the green light. But of course, you can imagine being the head or the vice president of engineering, Robert Lund, he is now under immense pressure because NASA wants to launch, so on and so forth. And what is happening is he's the man, his engineering team says, boss, no, we're not launching. These conditions that are currently going on, we are currently under, are not conducive to a proper launch. All right, they're not conducive to a proper launch. So as you see, Lund said he sticks with his guys. His guys says yes. His guys says, you know, don't launch. I'm sticking with my guys. Up comes his boss, his superior, Gerald Mason, who says to him, Lund, I need you to stop thinking like an engineer, but think like a manager. So this gives Lund, you know, time to pause. He pauses, he says, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. So what does Lund do? Lund overrides his natural instinct that, and what his staff said that they ought to do, his team of engineers said they should do, and said, things should be fine. Let's go ahead and launch. So he reverses his decision and says, you know what? Let's launch. And all of us here should be familiar with this story. It is one of those events where you say, I remember where I was when the space shuttle Challenger exploded in the sky, and 7 astronauts, including one primary school teacher who was selected out of thousands of candidates, she and all of them lost their lives. All right? This happened on January 28th, 1986. All right? When that occurred, and that was a big event. Imagine sitting in the seat of Robert Lund when he saw that occur. Because obviously you know what's going to happen now. His boss is going to say, but you are the vice president in charge of engineering. I merely made a suggestion. You should have gone ahead and done the thing that you knew what was best for the space shuttle, and not worry about that. As we know, when the proverbial number 2 hits the fan, people like to duck and to dodge, and it usually falls from on high, as opposed to, you know, the individual who was being influenced by others to do so. All right. So you get the impression, you see what kinds of difficulties people in organizations can face when they know what is the right thing or is the thing that they want to do. But in doing that, they get pressure from external sources. Let's look at a second one. In the early 1980s, this is a second example. In the early 1980s, the new CEO of Beechnut Nutrition Corporation found evidence to suggest that the apple juice concentrate in their 100% pure apple juice was in fact merely sugar water and chemicals. So they were advertising as having 100% pure apple juice, targeting children. But he found out that it really wasn't. It really was just sugar water with some colorant and some some chemicals for taste and so on to give it that apple taste. But it really was not the 100% pure concentrate that they were selling it on. However, the company was ailing, and eliminating all of that inventory to get the real thing that they really promised their customers would have destroyed any chance of a meager profit for the parent company, Nestle. So Nestle is the big boys at Nestle. This company failing, you're the new CEO, you are under immense pressure. You would have sold them a story. If you put me in charge, I'm going to be able to turn things around. You can count on me. And they said, yes, no problem. But you know you're under immense pressure. Now, here we see a situation here. When others in the organization, particularly the R&D department, voiced concerns about the product that they were putting out there, these individuals were referred to as Chicken Little. And if you're familiar with the story of Chicken Little, you know Chicken Little was the little chicken that was saying the sky is going to fall on our heads tomorrow. So they were accused of being a Chicken Little type figure, not being a team player, and being accused of being colored by naivety and impractical ideas. Listen, you are being impractical. You are not being a team player. You are not being part of the organization, so we can all benefit from any profits the company might get. We may all get a little bit more money in our pockets to take home, and so on and so forth. So their voices were shouted down by the majority. While the CEO made the decision, he's going to go with it. He's going to ignore what his conscience says, and he's going to continue with that inventory and see what happens. And what happened? In 1989, the CEO of the Beach Nut Corporation pleaded guilty to 10 counts of mislabeling. A total overall cost to Beach Nut, including lost sales, was an estimated $25 million. So because he, as the leader, took an unethical direction in his approach, what happened was that ultimately the company didn't make that great leap of profitability, or that small meager profit, that profitability they thought that they were going to get. What happened was he lost the company $25 million. And trust me, when you are the CEO, at the CEO level, you get to go to jail. That's your prize. You get to go to jail when you do things like this, misleading the public and affecting the public trust. So it didn't just affect the company in terms of its reputation, but it hit them where it hurts most, their bottom line. So you can imagine Beach Nut would have then had a real uphill struggle in order to win back the public's trust as far as their inventory and what they sell is concerned. So far, we've looked at two more or less negative approaches to organizations use in terms of their ethical approach being negative. Let's look at a more positive one at this time. Notice that all of these things happened in the 80s. The 80s seemed to be a very special time. In September 1982, a 12-year-old Mary Kellerman became the first of 7 people who died as a result of ingesting cyanide-laced Tylenol. Some of you may remember this story. All the cases were confined to the Chicago area. So it wasn't necessarily Chicago is a big city, but it wasn't national, but it was sort of confined to this small area, this relatively small area, I should say. An unknown individual had been poisoning the Tylenol post-factory. So they were going into the stores, into particular stores, and poisoning these capsules post-factory. And they did all their research. All right. And right, so Sean gives us the idea here. In the case of Beach Nut, it took a higher authority operating on a higher level of ethics to punish Beach Nut. And that is correct. It was government being fueled by society that would have pushed them. Yes, thanks for that clarification, Sean. Now, the McNeil Corp Consumer Products, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, who made the Tylenol, actively sent out mass communications countrywide, and I believe it went worldwide as well, warning of the issue, and recalled 35 million bottles of Tylenol in circulation nationwide. So they didn't just say, pull the inventory from the store shelves from Chicago. They said, no, we're not taking that risk. We're going to pull all Tylenol from the shelves. Pull it all from off the shelves. We're not going to risk the health of our of our consumers or customers for this with this nonsense. Now, they found additional capsules in the same area of Chicago that were laced, but because they recalled it, it was unconsumed. So you know what that means? That McNeil Consumer Products with their head company Johnson & Johnson, you know what they did? They would have tested every bottle that came back at great expense, just to make sure that just to see the extent of the problem and to see how best to contain it, right? And note a very important point here that I want you guys to take note of: the individual who would have laced these Tylenol has never been identified. The person who did it has never been identified. All right. Now, before the crisis, what happened? Tylenol controls more than 35% of the market. So whereas in Barbados, where we would say things like, go bring me back in earlier generations, we would have talked about bring me a Fenzik, or no, we would say bring me 2 Panadols, and that generally means any tablet you have in the house that is for a painkiller. Tylenol had the same kind of reputation and market share in the United States. Yes, or Wiz. Bring me 2 Wiz. For those who are old enough to remember Wiz. Bring me 2 Wiz. Right? They had a huge market share. But then once this crisis occurred, the number plummeted to less than 8%. Why? Starting with the fact that they would have taken all of the inventory off the shelves, so they would not have been able. People would not have been able to buy it at all. But in not being able to buy it at all, then when they started to push it back out, once they started to avert the crisis, they had less than 8% of the market share. From 35 to 8%, that is a huge market share loss. Tylenol as a brand was labeled as dead by the critics. Critics said, sorry, Tylenol, you are on your last legs. As we would say in our Barbadian vernacular, y'all going down through the edges. You know, we like to say things like that in Barbados. But what happened? Johnson & Johnson introduced new product protection methods and pledges, product production methods and pledges to protect the customers. In other words, they wrote something called codes of ethics for the company. We are going to ensure that this does not happen again. I mean, we can't be 100% sure, but we are going to do everything within our power to ensure that this does not happen again. So what else did they do? They didn't just give it lip service and put paperwork in place and write fancy words. They worked with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, right, to create tamper-proof packaging, which in turn became the industry standard. So everybody then adopted the same standards then that Johnson & Johnson put in place under the McNeil brand. They put all of that in place to ensure that, if with the tablets now, when you clip it, when you turn it, you break a seal. If it's children, it is tamper-proof. You have to sort of push it in and open it. What they did is they created new standards, and they created caplets. So not the same old tablets anymore. They created something called caplets, which also became more or less an industry standard as well, for which is, to prevent all of this debacle from occurring again. Look at point number 3, and I want you guys to focus on point number 3 for a little bit. Within a year of this event occurring, being labeled as dead, less than 8%. Within a year, and an investment of over 100 million. The guys did not, Johnson & Johnson, as I said, didn't give lip service. They put measures in place. They had measurables in place with the FDA. They created codes of ethics. They went the whole 9 yards, all right, in order to ensure that their customer base can see and hear, look, we have gone up and above the call of duty to ensure that you, our customers, are well taken care of. As Hadley says in the chat here, ethics isn't just nice stuff. It isn't just nice to have stuff. It is good business practices. And that is correct. So what happens? Tylenol's sales rebounded to its healthy path. So it goes past the 35% and goes even higher, and became the United States favorite over-the-counter pain reliever in less than a year. Why? Because they showed to their customer and their client base that they were serious about making sure that their customer base is taken care of, and that their codes of that they're employing a code of ethics that will surpass and go past what was there before, so that their customers can feel safe. In other words, Hadley makes this point, and it is one that you should hammer home for yourselves and for your own organizations that you may be affiliated with, that it isn't just nice stuff. It isn't just a nice to have. It is good business practices, right? And to incorporate it into your business, whether at the management level and the employee level, even working with your customers, it is vital. Now, Johnson & Johnson's decision became known as the Tylenol decision. It even got its own name, and is seen as a reflection of the organization's culture. And I want you guys to think about that. I want you guys to consider and to think about that word called culture. Culture is very, very, a lot of times we tend to poo-poo culture, to relegate it to the background. But culture is very, very important. Why? What have you noticed? What have you noticed? What have you noticed? Culture, Peter Drucker makes this statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But what I did is that I sort of massaged it and extrapolated it a little bit to tell you that culture beats policy 8 days a week. Culture beats procedure in the majority of cases. What do I mean by that? It does not matter what procedures you have written down. It does not matter what policies you have in place. It doesn't matter what strategies, all these wordy strategies you put in place for your organization. Guess what? If you have a negative culture, that culture will override any procedures, any policies, and any strategies you have in place. So if you have a culture in your organization where your customers are not paramount, you can have all the snazziest slogans you want in the world. Your employees will not do anything but the culture that they have. Let me give an example. I have a friend who fresh out of school went working in an organization. I won't state the organization. I won't state any of that stuff, but they went working in an organization. They went to replace as a temporary person, an employee who was a long-serving employee there. So she goes there as a temp, and the person she was going to replace for on a temporary basis was a person who went on sick leave, extended sick leave. So when she got there, the person's desk was full, or the person's desk was full of all these files, plenty of files. You couldn't see the desk with files. And the person's argument every day was, oh dear, I got all this backlog and all this work that needs to be done, and so on and so forth. And I just can't get through all of this. This making me sick. I'm going on sick leave, so on and so forth. My friend goes there, and within 2 weeks of getting there, notice what I said, within 2 weeks, 14 days. I know that, remember, 14 days is 2 exact weeks. There's weekends in there, so they wouldn't have worked weekends. So within 10 working days, she eliminated the entire backlog off the person's desk. Everything was gone. The desk was now clear. No more files on the desk. I'm going to ask a question. In your estimation, and you can put it in the chat, what do you think happened next? What do you think happened next? You can type it in the chat. Or if anybody feels brave, they can turn on their mic and share what they think happens next.
The one that is on, sorry, I should raise my hand. But
Yeah,
the one that is on sick leave, the one on sick leave, let us stay on sick leave. Permanent.
Right.
Sick leave.
So Karen says the one on sick leave should stay sick leave. Right? Should have stayed on sick leave. Any persons? So
I was going to say that I assume that the one who was on sick leave came back and they let go of the temporary person once she got rid of that enormous backlog.
Right. So Justin, my friend Justin says, yes, you know what? They will bring back the employee, and let go the temporary person. All right. All right. So here we have, let me look in the chat. Right. So Sean says she was castigated. Hadley says your friend was not brought back again. So Seneca says your friend replaced the person on sick leave. Patricia says in an ideal world, I would let go of the ineffective person. Gina says she was never made permanent. Your friend was told she was showing up people. Patricia then comes back and says, I believe the opposite occurred. People at the workplace said, you come out here to show off. Michelle says she agrees. The outcome depends on whether your friend worked in public or private sector. So we have a sort of a broad base of what people think would have occurred. Let me tell you what actually occurred. She did not even make it to the end of the sick leave, the person's sick leave. The people around her, the other employers, the other employees in that organization went to the boss and said to the boss, Skipper, get rid of this young upstart. She is making our friend look bad. And not only is she making our friend look bad, she's giving us a lot of work to do too. So my friend got transferred within a month after bringing down the backlog down to zero within a month. Within a month. That was the end of her. Transferred out, going to a different firm, a different organization. This ain't for you. You causing too much problems here for my person that is on sick leave and for the rest of us. So you guys clearly have encountered situations like this in your own, your own going through life and dealing with organizations where the person who is actually doing the work is the one who was causing problems for the majority. So you see there, culture was causing, the culture of that organization said, we are supposed to do this, we are supposed to do that, we are supposed to do all of these fantastic things. But my culture says, this new young upstart causing problems, have a good day. All right, so let's continue on. Let's get back to the screen for a bit. Yes, as others would have said, she is an upstart. She's causing problems. And you're asking, what does this say about that organization's leadership? Let's continue. The culture of an individual, organization, or society is in large measure determined by their ethics, which means that a shift in one can result in a shift of the other. So these things are not necessarily set in stone. They can be changed. The stone, as the old saying goes, you know, this too shall pass. It may pass like a gallstone, but it can pass, but it will pass. In other words, things can change, but what needs to change is the ethical outlook, the ethical perspective of those involved, right? So in other words, culture and ethics may have a symbiotic relationship. And I want you guys to recognize that. And it's not just culture of an organization, your culture, the culture that you allow to permeate around you, whether it is in your business, whether it's in your home, whether it's in church, whether it's in the society as a whole. And you know, we as a society now, Barbados, we are under a lot of pressure as far as the things we see going on, the level of gun violence and what have you, we see going on in the society. That is a reflection on the morality, on the moral underpinnings of our society. So let's look at the final point there that says culture, for the most part, or not a gallstone. What is it then? A kidney stone? Should we say a kidney stone instead? Is that the one that causes the most difficulty when it passes? I'm not sure. I'm not in the medical profession. Maybe one of our medical professionals could tell me which one is the right one. But culture, for the most part, is determined by leadership and perpetuated by those following said leadership. So if as we were saying, Barbados, if the head bad, the body is also in trouble. All right, the body is also in trouble. So let's think about that. All right, so those in leadership positions need to really take the perspective that they are the ones who are driving the position of the organization. Yes, it is must be set from inception. But what is fantastic about it, Sean and everyone else, is that with the right determination, that can be changed. It can be pulled around. But you need to have the right leadership as well as the right type of environment that invites that type of change to occur. All right, so I want you guys to mull over that as we go further into our presentation here. All right, let's continue on. So so what I want you to think about now is, why do you want to critically assess your ethics? Why do you want to do that? And I want you to consider the 3 points of view the 3 examples that I used just now. Okay, so Julia, who's one of our science individuals, says gallstones and kidney stones are painful and both can be passed by the individual. Okay, so good. Thanks for clearing that up. So if you're passing a kidney stone or a gallstone, know and understand that they can both pass and it can change. So the same way, changing the moral perspective of an organization, individual, society as a whole can be done, but it needs strong leadership and people who are willing to follow. All right. So on this point, I want to drive home to you. The success you attain, whether individually and or as an organization, in large measure depends on your ethical outlook and the ethical outlook of others. You are not only affected by yourself, by your own perspective, you are also affected by the perspectives of others as well. And that is something that we need to recognize as well. It is not just us, because we've all worked for organizations and we all know the difficulties we sometimes face as members in organizations where things that we see going on around us may not necessarily be conducive or seen as a okay. So Julia asked a question in the chat. What happens if you are punished for your ethics as in the case of of my friend. Well, I would argue and say my friend wasn't necessarily punished. I would say she went to a much better situation than she was in. She basically came out of as you would say, out of an ant's nest and went to a more favorable situation. But what happens? That is something that I discuss in my other seminars, webinars, my other seminars as well. And we can mention that. Julia, remember that question, and we can talk about that in the question and answer section. All right, let's continue. So I've been doing a lot of talking. I want some interaction. Yes, Simon, that is absolutely true, Simon. You may need to clear out some of the bad apples. You may need to clear out some of those bad apples to create the culture you want. And if we are familiar with world news and news coming out of the United States, I don't need to go any further than that. You guys can figure out what I'm talking about. That you get the picture. I won't say anything further than that. But let's move on. And let's do two quick exercises as far as to stimulate your thinking as far as ethics is concerned. Some of you would be familiar with these. The trolley problem. I'm using two. Yes, Val. Victimize is perhaps the better word. Yeah, okay, Sanika, go right ahead before I continue.
I wanted to find out if the organization at which your friend had the bad experience, does that organization still exist?
Absolutely. It absolutely still exists and still does business as we speak.
I'm surprised.
No, this is Barbados. Don't be surprised. And as I shouldn't even say that, because that's probably unfair. All countries have similar issues such as this, where inefficiency and ineffectiveness is the rule of the culture that is the norm.
Is it a private organization?
I'd rather not say.
Okay.
I'd rather not say.
I'm just asking those questions because an organization that has that kind of culture, especially if it is a private organization, I would expect that it would expire after time.
Right. Well, depending. Well, I guess I can easily use the example of Amazon. If you follow Amazon's example and the arguments that the things that Amazon staff have stated that they have been going through. I won't get into the details here, but you can go research it. It's all on YouTube. It's all on Google. You can Google it and see some of the things that the staff trying to become unionized to prevent some of the difficulties they're having. They're a huge private entity, and they are having their staff are claiming to have some really difficult situations going on. So let me go before we move over to the exercises. Let me just read some of the responses in the chat. Thanks for coming in, Seneca. Victimize is perhaps the better term, but we have to decide how much we value our beliefs and the consequences of being in and around certain practices and environments. And that is quite true. We have to sometimes make a determination if we want to be part of a culture that permeates or that proliferates, that is such a negative and toxic one. So that is a very important point there, Val. Crystal says, here's the problem though. Presuming that it is a government office that is responsible for a key aspect of our survival, that the impact on citizens is potentially far-reaching. For example, welfare, housing, etc. I'll leave your point there, Crystal, and it's a very valid one. But that would mean me divulging too much information, right? So let me. No, Krista, you say here that if it was a private institution, it would be such a terrible work ethic, the likelihood of it being a business is slim. I would push back on that quite a bit, particularly some of the businesses that I have gone into, private businesses I've gone into in Barbados and in other parts of the world. Not really. And again, I'll leave that there. All right. Yes. Again, as you say there, Seneca, quite true. Culture, Amazon's culture is different depending on the location. And I think you're right, because I've read the places where I read the Amazon's issues tended to be lower down in the 48 states of the contiguous United States. You can pick sense from nonsense there. All right. So let's talk about, let's look at these exercises, and I want you guys to participate, whether it is by using the chat or what have you, because I think it'll be interesting for us to look at. So what is the trolley problem? The trolley problem is a series of thought experiments designed to explore the depths of moral choices that persons and society may be confronted with. All right. So let's continue. So trolley problem number one, let me describe it. There's a trolley, a train that is out of control. It's traveling along a train track. And as it continues along the train track, if it continues along the train track, it's going to kill the 5 individuals there on the track. It's going to kill the 5 on the track. Now, the person standing next to the lever is you. All right. Some of you may be familiar with this. If you pull the lever, the train will leave that initial track and go off onto a secondary track. However, in going over to the secondary track, it will kill that lone individual. If it's the train can't be stopped. You can't send smoke signals. You can't text the person. You can't shout. All of these are answers they've received before. The train is either going to kill the 5, or if you pull that lever, you're going to kill the 1. My question to all of you this evening, and I want you guys to give me your thought. What will you do? Are you going to pull the lever, or you're not going to pull the lever? You can put it in the chat. Meanwhile, Crystal says a lot of businesses that I've audited, that poor ethic is in their pocket, not the entire organization. Granted, the ones where the entire organizations avoid work almost run into financial difficulties.
And I agree with Crystal. That is what my observation has been.
Right.
They can't last long.
Yeah. Well, you may be right, but again, I will counteract and say I've known several organizations that some of them are still very much alive, where the behavior, the unethical behavior, certainly has proliferated and has become the norm. So I have some people jumping in and saying, I see Kevin jumping in and saying, sacrifice the one for many. And Edison jumping in also as well and saying, pulling the lever once the thanks, Pam, once the outcome is certain. The outcome is certain. It's either 5 or it is 1. So Julia says to choose whether 5 or 1 to die is equally difficult, but I would say pull the lever. Shara K says, nope, not pulling the lever, not getting involved. Michelle says, it depends. Michelle, what does it depend on? Tell us what it depends on. But actually, don't tell us what it depends on yet. because I'm glad that you said that. And I'm glad you're the first person that made that statement. It depends. So let me see if how difficult or how hard it is to. So I want people first. Let's see how many persons by raising their hands would say, or raise their hand to say, I would pull the lever. So I'm seeing quite a few people. See if only 4 persons, 5 persons so far are pulling that lever. Okay. Movell, you want him to ask something?
I wanted to say I will not put a lever. I will only pull the lever if the 5 is detrimental to those who in the train, minus the 1 that is on the other side.
Right.
Okay. Otherwise, I wouldn't put a lever.
Okay.
So I would. Right.
Right. So you would not pull the lever. Okay.
It would depend.
Right. Okay. Good.
I want to ask if it's morally right
Yeah,
for the 5 to stand on the track when they see the train coming, and they see you standing by the lever, having to make the decision whether you should sacrifice them or sacrifice the 1.
The 5 or the 1, Justin, in this case, may not necessarily know. They may be working on the track, and they may not hear the train may be coming at such a speed that they may not know it's coming. So on and so forth, right? So just to give you a perspective, right? So Othniel says pull the lever. So we have quite a few people here saying they're going to pull that lever. All right. Now, if everybody is strangers there, we are going to pull that lever, right? But let me just be difficult player or play devil's advocate by asking this: what if that 1 person was some person no hardly, but we'll come to that in a bit. So I'm glad you also raised that. Right? What if the one
person is your mother?
What if, yeah, exactly. What if that 1 person is your mother or your child? Are you still going to pull the lever? You get the perspective. So a lot of the times when we make moral decisions, so because normally we would say 5 lives versus 1 life, let's pull that lever. But a lot of the times when we make moral decisions, when we make ethical decisions, when we make decisions, numbers don't necessarily come into place, especially depending on who's involved in that situation. We may make a different decision if that's our mother or child. Chances are the 5 people, sorry to be you. You kind of get the picture. Yes, Harley, that point you're making there is a very interesting point. And I was about to make that. What happens if you pull the lever and 5 and 1, you save the 5 and the 1 is saved? However, you get to find out subsequently that the 5 were actually terrorists trying to blow up the line, while the 1 was some person who was, and I'm being exaggerating for emphasis here. The 1 person then that is there is some person that's doing research. They were just crossing the train track, but they were on the verge of curing cancer. I'm being ridiculous for emphasis. When we look at that, we say, you know, you may not see it in the same vein anymore. My friend Othniel over there is still saying he still is pulling that lever. Again, when we talk about moral decisions, sometimes when we make moral decisions, yes, Julia, our bias comes into play. And sometimes when we make moral decisions at a particular point in time, we don't have all the information. We make moral decisions based on the information we have currently. Yes. Thank you, Sean. Very well said. you are operating on limited information. At this level, all we see are 6 people. And a lot of the times when we make moral decisions, we are making it in blinkered because of that. Yes, Ed, you want to jump in?
No.
Good to see you, Ed. Yeah, okay. So here we have these. So let's move on. So let's move on. Let's move on. And look at this, the trolley problem, number one, from a different perspective, from a historical perspective, right? In World War II, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill received intercepted communication that the Germans were going to bomb central London. Now, central London in World War II is where the majority of people lived in tunnels. It's where the seat of government was at the time, right? So people were living and existing there. And the Germans were saying that they were going to bomb central London. They had the coordinates. The coordinates suggested it was central London they were going to hit. Now, obviously, this is before Google and all that. So they relied on information coming back and so on, right? So it was not a matter of them having a choice. It was either central London was going to be bombed by the Luftwaffe. They're going to send these big bombs and bomb central London out of existence, severely hampering the UK's war effort. But what happens? Ultimately, what did Churchill decide to do? Churchill decided he was going to pull the lever. So rather than all those people being killed in central London, he forwarded the coordinate, he changed the coordinates slightly and forwarded those coordinates, forwarded on so that slightly, so it wasn't too different. But the bombs would then hit the suburbs of London rather than central London where the war effort was. And what happened was that far few people died in the bombing by Hitler than was done if the coordinates had not been changed. So where my father, he lives in suburbs of London. And when you drive along his street, when you walk along his street, you see that all the houses look the same, except for a bunch of houses in the middle of his street. And that his street is one of the streets where the bombs from Germany hit in the suburbs of London rather than central London. All right. So what is that? When we look at it from a practical point of view, what can we say? Moral decisions are not always good versus bad. And Churchill could attest to that. Sometimes it can be bad versus worse, or both equally bad, and you still have to pick one. Some of our moral decisions may differ depending on who the participants are. We would have talked about that. And sometimes the majority may benefit at the expense of the minority. 5 versus 1. Let that spin around in your head for a little bit while we move on to the second trolley problem. Right? And Lashes makes a very interesting point. It's easy to say what we would do now, but make instinctual decisions in a moment in real life. And that is absolutely true. So trolley problem number 2, similar thing. There's no second lever. This time there are 5 people on the line and there's a bridge. The trolley's coming and it's going under the bridge. And you are on the bridge and you recognize that there's a rather fat man, rather portly gentleman on the bridge. And you surmise that if you push the fat man off the bridge, he comes head down, the train will hit that portly gentleman and it will slow down the train enough for those 5 to be rescued before, pardon me, for those 5 to be rescued before they come to harm. Point, here I ask again, do you push the fat man? You can use it sounds ludicrous, but again, not so much. And you'll see why in a minute. Sean.
Why
Yes.
doesn't he jump himself?
The man doesn't want to be involved. You're involving the man by pushing him.
The man is slim and he will not slow down the train.
Right. So people know. So these are the same persons that are saying to me, they're not going to push the fat man, but they're going to pull the lever and let the one person get squashed. How does that work out? How do you reconcile that? Or Kevin feels attacked. My apologies, Kevin. I don't want you to feel attacked at all. How do you reconcile pulling the lever and pushing the fat man, and pulling the lever but not pushing the fat man? What is that I'm hearing? Is that birds? Is that a cricket's chirping?
Since I pulled the lever in the first one, I guess I'll push the fat man in this one just to stay.
Right. So Justin says he has to be consistent. If he pulls the lever, he has to push the fat man. Any person else agrees with that?
No, I don't agree. I'm going with it depends again.
Mm.
I'm wondering what is the reason for the persons laying on the track? Is it suicide?
So
Then
you're right, but
it depends again.
Right. So Michelle says she thinks it right. It's an ethical right. It's an ethical right. So Kevin makes an interesting point here. And Sean jumps in as well. Right. So Hadley says, very interestingly, pulling the lever can be defended to yourself as trying to help in a desperate situation. Yeah, let me just make sure that I don't get past that. Desperate situation you had nothing to do with. Pushing is active taking of a life, harder to defend yourself. And that is and that is the point I want you guys to recognize. Let me just see what else is something people saying. Probably because you have some empathy for the man because he is fat. Pulling the lever allows to emotionally distance themselves from their choice. Maybe the person is fat too. Who knows? But Harley makes a very interesting point, and I will sum it up in one word: intentionality. What was your intention when you pulled that lever to save the 5 lives? What was your intention when you pushed the fat man? Still to save the fat man, to save the 5, but you, on the other hand, you are involving persons. You are actually, your intention is different in case number 1 as opposed to case number 2. So let's think about that. All right. So let's move on quickly. We're running in good time, but I don't want to keep you here indefinitely. In 1945, Japan and the US were still at war, and the war was projected to go on a few more years. Germany had fallen, but the Japanese were still very much engaged in the South Pacific and so on. The US wanted to end the war quickly to save lives and money. So what did they do? The US decided to drop 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nicknamed ironically Little Boy and Fat Man. And they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the war immediately. So the war ended and it was celebrated. At this stage though, now that we know the difficulties and the problems that nuclear radiation causes based on our on the example of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, would people in today's world make the same decision based on that? We have had wars aplenty and very difficult wars since then, but at no point in time since then have we dropped any nuclear weapons anywhere else in the world. And we've had some very difficult wars, even against people who may be considered lesser than. The world has still not dropped bombs, atomic bombs, I should say. And there's a reason for, is there a reason for that? Now that we see what the outcome down the road is. When we look at it now from a practical point of view, what should we gather? Sometimes, I stated this earlier, sometimes the consequences of moral decisions that we make may be short-sighted. They may seem right in the moment, but upon reflection and on hindsight, we may say, I really should have made different decisions. Again, in hindsight, we look at difficult decisions we made much less favorably. We made a decision to do something. But when we look at it again with the ability of hindsight, to be in 2020, the way that it is, we may say, you know what the decision we made then may not have been the right one. All right. Let me just peek into the chat real quick. All right. And so if we look at it from a practical point of view, should a doctor be able then to save several lives at the expense of one life? One person, let's say a person is a perfect match for several of his clients that may be able, that he can save them their lives by transplants, heart, liver, so on and so forth, but they're in a coma or they're brain dead. Should the doctor make that decision to cause that, to end that person's life so that he can save those 5 individuals? Should he commit murder in order to do so? I'm pretty sure the medical persons who may be here would say to you, their 4 principles of ethics would not allow them to do such. All right. So let's continue. So that brings us to the end of my presenting. Right. There you go. As you said, the doctor cannot make that decision, Seneca. The man's proxy family or proxy caregiver would have to do so. And there's a reason for that. Right. So I've more or less come to the end of what I wanted to present to you this evening. So what I want to open now is the floor to any questions, any points anyone wants to make, anything they want clarified or discussed, anything you want to share, please, this is the time to do so. Any questions any person may have. So, right, so Harley's asking the question, you are the mayor of Wuhan in December 2019. Do you indefinitely detain patient 0 so that the world never experiences COVID-19? In hindsight, we like in my example, my second example of pushing the fat man, I certainly think that most people in the world would say, absolutely do that. However, Kevin says lock them away like Rapunzel. But there is some evidence to suggest that December 2019 was not the start of COVID-19. But I'm not here to get into that discussion for obvious reasons. This is not what this discussion is about. But based on what was asked, I think most people will go with the answer and say, most definitely, most definitely. So we have two hands raised. Tim, you go first.
Good evening, everyone. I placed a question in the chat. It seemed that it was not visible to you. It says, please discuss the ethics of the former president of a prominent world power who allegedly incited supporters to, in brackets, almost murder his own vice president who dared to uphold the Constitution. What makes people loyal to such an individual?
Well, that is the question, Tim, that is kind of outside the scope of what I want to carry, what I want to do this evening. But I'll say this, because it is not only a matter of what happened there in that prominent country, but we see it unfold quite often within local businesses and entities as well, where persons will show loyalty to a boss or a leader, whether that leader is a boss or whether they are a ringleader. I'll use that. People will show loyalty to individuals like that within an organization, because these people are talking the talk and stating the statements that these people like to hear. I've seen organizations where persons were almost unfireable, and these persons would not work. But this is the person that will come to work and tell the most worthless jokes. You're familiar with the term. They will come to work and tell the most worthless jokes. When everybody goes out, they're the ones who buy all the drinks. They're the ones who always quick with a story, not to do any work, but they are there and they've been there for many years. And that persons will literally go to war with management if management ever tries to fire that individual. And that's also a true story, by the way. I've seen that up close and personal, where persons are working in organizations, and because they show certain loyalties to the person at the top, that they are treated with kid gloves as opposed to other individuals within the organizations. And I've seen that in organizations time and time again. So the person, as the Dark Knight puts in the chat, which is I could not put it any better. This happens when you stress the cult in culture. I could not put it any better. Sean, and then I'll come to you, Harley, then we'll continue.
Hey, good night. The point I was going to make here is about, in essence, what is ethics? And from the point of view that, to me, ethics is dynamic. It is kind of not set in stone. And I think that came out in your first question about ethics, the number of the responses. And it comes down to, a lot of times, whose ethics trumps whose. I may have an ethical standard that might be rather low based on my conscience, how I think. But along comes someone who may very well have a higher ethical standard, as we were discussing, we were talking about the culture, that then says, no, your ethical standard is rather low, and therefore my trumps yours. So like the company Beach and Nut, for them, ain't a problem hiding up this problem. But then the nation's law says nobody. You can't do that. And I will kind of go a little biblical here to illustrate my point. Now, the Pharisees would have had, if one can say, an ethical standard following the law, thou shalt not murder. So for them, I haven't physically killed someone, therefore my ethical standard is quite high. But they encounter Jesus. And Jesus says, my standards are a bit higher than that. If you say to your brother Reka, you have killed him already. So now Jesus' standards trumps theirs. You see it again in the situation when he was talking about forgiveness. Now, apparently the standard was if you forgive someone 3 times, you're good to go. You can lick them up afterwards. Peter, now looking for brownie points and trying to show that he has a higher ethical standard, says, should I forgive them 7 times? So his standard in his mind is higher than the conventional standard of ethics. Jesus comes and says, no, mine is actually quite higher than yours, 70 times 7. So ethics to me tends to be, is dynamic. And therefore you will find quite often it tends to move around based on the circumstances, based on who is setting them, based on the goals in mind. So like you were talking about Amazon. Amazon may have a reputation of not treating their workers in an ethical manner, but they treat their customers in an ethical manner. So now, Amazon is not going to falter at this stage because, hey, when I put in my order for a pair of shoes and they tell me I will get them in 7 days, I get my shoes in 7 days. I can care less how they treat the sales staff. I got my shoes. Now, if they violate my rights as a customer and I get my shoes in 10 days consistently, now we got a problem. So now, whose ethic, who are you catering to? So that's why for me, ethics is a rather interesting thing. It can move, and then it ultimately comes down to whose ethics trumps who. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for your insight. Hardly.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for the very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. I just wanted to circle back a little bit to Timothy's question, and it brings back to my mind values, similar to what Sean said last. The same reason Amazon gets through because to the majority of customers, they believe it's an ethical company. If I say something was wrong in my order, they don't ask me any questions, they will get it to me. And because if I don't have any personal stake, that tends to trump things. So to Timothy's question, if we got up tomorrow and had a press conference saying the Coast Guard or BDF or Barbados Police Service shot someone who was trying to land on one of our beaches illegally, we probably will have a range of things. 1, where was this person getting on? 2, was it justified to shoot them? If it comes out later, though, that this person had a highly infectious disease that would have ravaged Barbados in a very short period of time, most people would end up thinking that officer who shot them made the right decision. Similarly, many of the people who back that president, their value is what their world is under threat. And there are people who are directly threatening it, and there are people who are allowing others to directly threaten it. Human beings, no matter where they were born, what color they are, what belief they have, usually react very strongly in those situations to defend the lives and the things they value over other people, especially when we feel under threat. So to be honest, I don't know that it is really an abnormal situation to see people being loyal. We now say right here that Churchill was a great prime minister. for leading the UK through that. If it was our family who died and got banned, we probably wouldn't say that. If I'm making sense here, usually to the victor go the spoil. So whoever comes out on the better end usually feels much better about the decision.
Yes.
And I think that is a fact of human beings, no matter what country or culture they come up in. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Hadley. As I said before, sometimes when moral or ethical decisions are being made, the majority can trump the minority. Thanks, Hadley. Danny.
Yes, good night, everyone. One thing I picked up when I was listening to the presentations and the scenarios is that something that we didn't really think about would be the whole idea of the mob mentality developing out of this whole idea of, you go along to get along. So you have someone who be coming into an organization, they come in with all these ideals. Yes, I'm going to make sure that I help this business. I'm going to develop this company. But then they start to realize, okay, when I go and give my 100%, it reflects badly on my coworkers, as they would like to say. But you realize, well, I'm putting in all this effort and I'm not getting the rewards that I would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize, okay, why am I working so hard with this such a low return? I'm stressing myself out and I'm not being rewarded. It's not reflecting well in the company. So you realize, you might start to slack off a little bit, try to ease back, pace yourself. That's what a lot of the older folks in the company will tell you. You got to pace yourself. You're going to burn yourself out if you come in hot all the time like this. And then you realize, well, let me get in good with this person, even though they may not be what you would have chosen to be your mentor when you first started. You realize, well, this person seems to understand the politics within the company. Let me go along with what they're doing. Let me use them as my mentor. Let me use them as my sounding board. And then eventually you end up with this group forming that they have a certain way of doing things, and you have to go along with what they're doing in order for what your ideas to be even listened to. So that somehow ends up becoming the whole mob per se, that if you don't go with what the newly developed culture, this subculture within the culture of the company, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to get stressed out. And it kind of has a sort of domino effect, because new people coming into the company, now you're one of the older persons in the company and they're copying you, they're modeling their behavior within the company on what you are doing, not realizing that what you're doing is just copying what you saw other people doing. And tying it back to the whole issue of the former president, when he had first begun his efforts to become the party leader, a lot of the people that are now backing him so vociferously, they were totally against him publicly. But they realized, oh wait, certain persons within the party and outside the party who were politically very powerful started to back him because he was espousing things that they could only say in private. He's saying it in public. And he is getting the attention that they want, but they're going to allow for him to be the face to make these points. And he is drawing and rallying a group of people now that before felt as though they were unheard. Right. So now these people that before were saying, oh, he's not right for the job, they are now realizing, well, he's the one who's getting all this power within the party. And if I want to survive in this party, I have to be seen as going along with what he's saying. Yes. I have to defend him. I have to support him, because I will lose whatever credibility I have now if I'm not seen as being a supporter of what he's doing. And the people within my party are not going to turn on me if I'm not seen to be going along with what's happening. And the higher up in the group you're going, if anyone questions it, then you are also going to be involved in being exposed. And you don't want that. You don't want people to say, but look how you involved in this. So you want it to seem as though everything is great, everything is perfect. So you have to keep going along with whatever this person who is taking the lead is doing.
Yes. Thank you so much, Danny, for your contribution. And that is it's a very important one you've made, because again, it comes back down to the culture that we see around us. If that is the type of culture that we have, and you see it in organizations all the time, I want to fit in. I want to go with the flow. Yeah, I want to go with the flow. So in order for me to go with the flow, I have to act in particular ways. It may be against even my own principle. And I'll mention that, pardon me, I'll mention that a little bit when we go forward again. Why? Because it's another point that I like to talk about in my seminars, when I do corporate training for individuals and so on, that they can see there. And I'll talk about it in a little bit. Seneca, I'll let you come in, and then you'll be the last one while I wrap up.
Let me join those who thank you for, having this forum where people can express ideas and ask questions. With respect to Timothy's question, I put in the chat, and I'll read what I put in the chat. The basic problem is that people have not been taught to be critical thinkers and to ask pertinent questions. Therefore, they believe every fear-mongering thing that they hear, and they embrace the Barabbas mentality that pushed the crowd to choose Barabbas above Jesus. And I think this is what you see happening with on the political scene here in the US. There's been a lot of fear mongering that has been pushed. So different ethnicities are fearful of each other. And since people don't ask questions, and one of the things, this machinery has been set in place for a long time, because in our schools, we don't teach students to be thinkers. We want to be givers of knowledge rather than training the mind to think for itself. And because people don't ask those critical questions, they go along with whatever they're told. So, the evidence for global warming could be hitting you right between the eyes. And they'll tell you there's no such thing as global warming. And that's because of how they have been trained to react. Just accept what your leader, the leader that you see as your favorite leader, is telling you, and go along with the flow. The other thing I want to say about ethics is that largely your ethics is going to be informed by your reality and what truth is to you. And this is where the whole point of is truth relative or is truth absolute comes into play. And one would hope that, for Christian people, that we have some absolute truths that will help to guide our ethics. When truth is relative, ethics will be very relative when it is based on those relative truths. And the last thing I would say is that organizational culture and its mission, the mission of the organization, go hand in hand. So you will find that if an organization doesn't have a clear mission, and I know when we hear mission, we think religious, but I'm not even thinking in religious terms. But every organization that is hoping to be successful has to have a mission. And that mission must be uppermost in the mind of all the persons in the organization, beginning with the leader. And if the leader doesn't set a cultural tone, that supports that mission. And if he doesn't keep that mission clearly before him, the organization is going to fail eventually. So that's my take on some of the things, some of the points that you raised today.
Thank you so very much to you, Seneca, and to all the others who would have contributed as far as your thoughts are concerned. All right. So let me just move forward. All right. So that brings us to the end pretty much of what we were going to do this evening. But it would be remiss of me not to talk a little bit about the company, Eudaimonia Barbados, and what other things we offer besides just this free webinar for everybody. We discuss, we do seminars, based on the employee-employer relationship. The dynamic there for many persons, because the majority of persons tend to be employees, they think that the ethical perspective must be from the employer to them. But employees also have moral objectives, ethical concerns that they too must find themselves part of. Okay. What is the responsibility of management towards employees and customers? What is the responsibility of employees towards management and customers? So those are things that I deal with when I do my my seminars and what have you. Trust and honesty, integrity, and the problem of fragmentation. Fragmentation is a huge problem, or let me not call it a problem. It's a huge, should be a huge concern. It's not necessarily a problem, but it's a concern. When we talk about fragmentation, what do we mean? I'll just give you a brief synopsis. And you know, once I say this, you'll understand what I mean. People say you're different, you behave differently when you're at home than when you're at work, than when you're in your social circles. You wear 3 different masks, or as many masks as you would want to have based on the situation you find yourselves in. And fragmentation is a huge is an interesting problem, and it's something that I like to develop when I do my seminars, when I do training for individuals and so on. I like to talk about fragmentation because that is certainly something that management ought to, everybody, but management in particular, ought to be discussed or ought to be aware of. Talking about confidentiality, again, a huge problem, you know, and confidentiality as opposed to whistleblowing. Those are 2 different things. Some people who are being whistleblown on would argue that their confidentiality is being breached, but those are 2 different things. Okay, here's one. And this one I like to emphasize as well. The difficulty of working with others. A lot of people say their jobs would be perfect if they didn't have to work with other people. The difficulty of working with others, and a practical guide, which I have labeled the Eudaimonia principles, and you can see it there on the screen, what I labeled the Eudaimonia principles of making the workplace environment one that is a lot more tenable for people to deal with. And that tends to bring a lot of interaction from individuals when I hold those seminars or when I hold those discussions for people. All right. And finally, I talk about professional ethics, not just professional ethics in terms of what we locally call professional support. Once you go into the working world, you become a professional, but professional in terms of persons that are labeled, job types that are labeled professional jobs, doctors, lawyers, nurses, accountants. I have sessions set up particularly for those to help discuss professional ethics and what that really entails and what that means at the general level and also at the very specific level as well. All right, so here are some of the services that my company offers. We do corporate training for businesses, professional organizations, NGOs, and government. So if there are any government individuals who are here, by all means, reach out and we can discuss training for individuals. Consultancy is not enough, and a lot of the times it's not enough just to come and talk at people or discuss with people. You need to go even more fundamentally deep than that. So you help. So this company, what we do, we help these entities, the ones I name above, to engage with their staff, their clients, their customers with an ethics-based approach to improve their internal and their external customer service. People think when they think customer service, they only think externally. But as an IT professional, as a former IT professional, and those who work in IT or in other branches within organizations, guess what? You have internal customers. As long as you're servicing some person else, they are your internal customer. And so people tend to neglect the internal customer. So I try to highlight those as well. And finally, I assist companies and entities in writing their writing ethics, their codes of ethics, and other documents that they can incorporate into their marketing and their training documentation. So here at Eudaimonia, we have a wide gamut of services that we offer, and I hope that persons here can go back and tell others what they encountered here. Hopefully you enjoyed it and so on, but there is the focus on helping organizations, individuals, even at the societal level, to start with an ethical foundation, and to, as part of their foundational, the foundation of their business, and that they can, or their organization, business, individual life, whatever, and they can build on top of that. All right. Let me just continue to say, here is my contact information. Please, you can take screenshots, you can take a look, you can write it down. Any and all feedback is welcome. Whether positive, negative, I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback. All right, you see all of the information there. Cell number, email addresses, you can reach out. As I said, any and all feedback is welcome. Send me your feedback. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me say thank you so much to all of you for attending.
I will talk to you in person about what I think.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Great presentation, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yes, yes, and Lex, I'm glad.
Presentation, Kevin.
Thank you so much. And that is something else that I also do as well. I didn't put everything on the list, but I try to help persons, Lex, to begin the process of thinking critically. That is a huge part of it, or part of what I do as well, to help persons. And you would have, that's why I use the examples that I use with the trolley problem, to get people to start to think critically, to recognize that things aren't necessarily black and white. They aren't necessarily straightforward, but we can certainly get to a point where if we employ some of the things if we employ our talent or ability to think critically, and it's something that needs to be taught, and it's something that that is part of what I do, what we do here at Eudaimonia Barbados, I can see it being profitable. Let me just scroll down to make sure I haven't missed anyone. Yes, and yes, thank you everyone for attending. If any, I'll stick around a little bit longer for if anybody who wants to talk without me doing the recording. So I'll stop the share at this time. Right, there we go. And I'll let anyone who wants to stick around can stick around afterwards and share and discuss for a little bit of time after. But here is the end of our official program. Have a good evening. We'll have another one, or you want me to go back to see the email address? Let me let me share that again then. Let me share that screen again real quick. Let me share the screen a bit real quick. And let me go backward. So that you guys can see this. Yes, thanks everyone for dropping by. So I'll leave that up. I'll leave that up for a little bit. And I'll stop the recording at this time.